great. Well, as Finn mentioned, Glovo is one of the fastest growing delivery startups in the world. And it has a really unique strategy in terms of market presence. How do you decide when to enter or exit a market? And what has this meant for Glovo's growth?
Um, well, I'll start first of all that we didn't really, have the magic sauce at the beginning. I mean, there's been a lot of learnings on the way. All those learnings generally come from mistakes that give you a little bit of experience, and then they help you make correct, better decisions in the end. Um, we generally we value above all our possibilities of leading the market. We think there's huge advantages in the way our platforms run and how our competitors run their businesses to be market lead or co-lead or very close to the leader. A good example would be, if we have more orders coming in, then our couriers will have more orders coming in, so they'll have more earnings per order. Maybe the distances will be shorter because there's more content, and then that'll attract more partners. So the best content in your city, the best restaurants, the best stores, the best will want to be on your platform because you have. So this, it's like the snowball effect that as things get bigger, it benefits every side of our three-point marketplace. So we've really focused on that, and that's allowed us to expand very quickly to a lot of different places, a lot of different continents. In fact, we started off in Southern Europe, but we've moved to Latin America, Eastern Europe, even higher to the ex-Soviet Union bloc, a lot of countries there, and more recently Africa, and all very different, but all clearly focused on that. And that's meant leaving some markets as well very quickly. So making decisions that we don't think we can achieve leadership, and there's a lot of reasons around why we probably wouldn't see that way to leadership, and how we should invest the funds where we're investing those in those regions, those countries, to countries where we can attain leadership. It's a strategy. It's not, we're not the only ones doing that, but a lot of our competitors have different strategies, and I think they're all valid, but that's our focus.
How do you get the snowball started? You've decided to enter a market. What's the first step?
Well, the first step, I mean, we have what we call a launching team, which are very transversal, and often they've launched other countries, so they've learned from the experience, and they go in and they really set the groundwork, and they help us even hire the GM. We give a lot of autonomy to our local teams. We try and hire really senior people locally. We're a very local business. In fact, we're not even a region or country business. We're a city business where every city is unique, and that's why local decision making is super important. We can empower, we can give them the tools, but at the end of the day, we give a lot of autonomy to our GMs, our managing directors in the countries and the regions, and they have to be rock stars if we're going to win those countries and offer a great service, grow the business. It's very competitive. So I think that's the way we do. We go in very quickly with a launch team. We have a playbook. It doesn't always work, but we adjust it depending on, and then we try and hire top-notch local teams and give them autonomy.
And how do you think about product market fit? Glovo isn't just food delivery. It's not just restaurant orders. How do you decide what each market is going to be interested in, and how to actually handle the logistics of that?
Yes, so that's one of the big challenges we have. We've been pioneer in allowing you to order anything on our platform since day one, since we launched in 2015. In fact, our vision is to give everyone easy access to anything in your city, which now is becoming a little bit more commonplace after COVID, where a lot of our competitors, which are generally focused on restaurant food alone, are moving into other segments, like groceries is the next one. But we actually have been delivering groceries since 2015. But we not only deliver groceries, we're delivering clothes. We're allowing you, to, if you forgot your keys, we'll go and get them, to any local store, so that offers challenges because every city is different, every culture is different. A good example is typically we launched in Spain, where our headquarters in Barcelona, and and our second country is Italy, and I can just imagine the amount of motorbikes or bicycles that are part of the ecosystem already is a natural. So it's very easy to find couriers who are just already deliver. Whereas if you go to our latest, which is more recent region, Africa, I mean, first of all, there's no bicycles in most of the cities. It's super dangerous to ride a bicycle, or there's hardly any motorbikes either. So So there's cultural things that actually you have to adapt to, and depending on that, and then and also we've had markets where you go in day one, and our restaurant delivery business is about only 50%, whereas you enter other markets and it's 95%. So it just shows you how the market reacts and how they're used to, and depends on that. And that's been, that's obviously been a challenge to get it right and to understand the market. Makes it a little bit more complex, but the upsides are huge because I think we offer a much better service. I think customers really engage with us. I always say it's not cool delivering a hot pizza. We've been receiving hot pizzas for 30 years, even before the internet. So it could be a great pizza, but then if you deliver nappies because you've run out at 2 a.m, then that becomes a wow moment, and you might do that a lot less often during the year than ordering pizza. But at the end of the day, that's the moment when you start talking about it, and we have this emotional connection with our customers, which is super cool.
Yeah, that's an amazing service to be able to offer people. That level of complexity and adaptability really is, I would imagine, presents a good number of regulatory challenges, especially because you are dealing with city governments, national governments, et cetera. How have your experiences differed across countries or regions?
Yeah, there's a lot of complexities, different regulations in different countries, different regions. I think there's a few things that we're touching on in Glovo that we're disrupting. Obviously, one is the future of work. This great debate worldwide that we read about every day, almost, about a gig economy and how workers' rights, and that's obviously a huge one. And it's the conversation is worldwide. I think some regions and some countries are more specific on this and see this much more as an issue to protect against than an opportunity to how can we regulate to really improve things. So we're in that stage, but then there's other regulatory things around products. I mean, alcohol, we deliver pharmacy, in pretty much every single country. So obviously medicine is hyper regulated, so it should be. So so they regulate. So we've got a lot of moving parts that we have to adapt to, and obviously, we have a really important legal team and a lot of that to make sure that we're not putting our foot in it. But if you go on the big one, the big elephant in the room was the gig economy. So this is interesting. So we're launched in Spain, which is recently just passed one of the strictest, toughest regulations on gig economy, above all delivery, which is, in essence saying that, the employees, unless you can demonstrate the contrary. Whereas you have other regions, if you go up to Scandinavia, was that they're allowing actually the worker to choose. Does he want a more flexible timetable? Does he want this, or does he want something more fixed? And I think the EU is looking at that, which is important. I think we probably need some sort of regulation that covers a wider range of countries, so you're not doing different operations and different business models in every single country. The good thing about being in Spain, which is probably one of the toughest, if not the toughest country on this day, is this is our home. This is our largest market still. So if we can adapt here, it'll put us in a really good place to adapt anywhere. And then just culturally and work-wise, I mean, when we launched in Latin America, I mean, we were expecting, we reached out to regulators and we reached out to the government, and the first feedback we got, which was a shock to us coming from Southern Europe, was this is great because until now delivery has been 95% or 100% in a submerged market. In a sense, most delivery guys were paid in cash, either on a daily basis, on a week, so completely under the radar. And we're coming in with technology. Obviously, everyone's legal, everyone's working. Suddenly, we were offering transparency to a business that was completely in submerged economic market. So they were open arms. That was a shock, and say, wow. And obviously, I mean, in Africa, it's a similar situation where there's that. So we're actually looked upon very well by regulators in some of these areas, because we're actually being super transparent and actually regulating an unregulated business in many cases.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think especially in Europe, we're very used to, hearing about the challenges of the gig economy from a regulatory perspective. But that's fascinating that there's such a wide range of perspectives from governments. and that it is bringing things above board as well as presenting challenges. What do you have a sense, especially given all the different markets that you're operating in? What would you say effective regulation of the gig economy looks like? That's $1 million
Well,
question.
I think the first thing, I mean, I think it'd be great, and in most cases, I assume they try to do that because the more information and the more input they have, the better regulation is. That's obviously a no-brainer. For me, ideally, it looks like that workers on the gig economy should have equal rights independently of how they work. No one has yet explained to me why a freelance or autonomous worker cannot have the same social protections as somebody with a fixed labor contract. I mean, at the end of the day, it's pure economics. At the end of the day, it's giving them protection. And there's 5 or 6 protection here. There's guaranteed income. There is, access to paid holidays, sick pay, pension or pension funds. There's ways of doing this collective voice. Nobody talks about that. That's super important. It's not just one individual that can be excluded from a platform by as a company. That's one thing that the trade unions generally do, is they give collective voice. So you can't, and it's not probably useful for 90% of the companies who intend to do things well. It's actually to protect against the 10% of companies who are not so ethical. But that needs to take place. So these things can be put in place for autonomous workers. I mentioned, North Europe, but I mean, Scandinavia well ahead of this, of looking at this and how workers can be protected, but also have flexible models. So I think that's the way it should be addressed. And when I talk about equal protection rights, I'm still talking about, the companies fitting the bill for this. I'm not, passing this and they can have protection. No, I'm saying, no, this can be built into the model where companies like ourselves. And why do I say that? Because the majority of these workers are looking for temporary income. This isn't the job of their lives. They're looking for easy access to income. So low barriers, no long-term interviews, waiting weeks to get, literally they can be working within 48 hours with a transport, with a smartphone, with a regulatory, with their permission to work. And often they're combining it with something else, or they're potentially going to move on to something else very quickly. Generally, I mean, there's super professionals who've been at it for years, but at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with that, and giving people easy access to income. What maybe the gig economy hasn't done so well is the protection of the workers, and generally that's because I don't think most of us saw it coming. When we started these companies, we were entrepreneurs a bit naive, in the sense that, and we're lucky we are, because if we were not naive, we'd never start a business. We see all the problems that, but in our case, it was, I just, thought, wow, I mean, imagine, and I remember thinking it was like an Uber of things, because Uber just started in the US and they were doing this sort of ride hailing. I thought, wow, imagine having an app that could just bring you anything in your city, right? And whoa, and then I'll be giving incremental revenue to all these stores, so they're going to love it. And then I'll find all these people with free time who are going to have an extra income doing it. Now, the reality is a bit like that, but the reality is actually the workers doing it end up not being just people who want to spend 5 hours a week, but actually dedicate, because they can realize they can make a really decent income on this, and actually it is a lifeline for them economically. And that's when it's a difference. And then you say, oh, well then, okay, when they don't have Glovo, when they move on, then they should have a similar protection of workers who might have had a labor contract. So I think there's a work needs to be done there. I think trade unions don't like this attitude of fixing it, because generally they're out of the question when we talk about freelance workers. So they're much more concerned about them being labor linked than actually giving them more rights and more protection to freelancers, because then they're generally out of the equation with freelancers. So I think it's a lot of work. I think the EU looks like they're addressing it the right way. There's getting feedback from all parts, and I think I'd be hopeful that we'd come to some good consensus. Probably not immediately, because these things take a while, but hopefully.
Yeah, what do you have sort of a vision for your couriers, or for the wider sort of category of gig economy workers, freelancers, et cetera? What are some of the opportunities, but also the challenges of interacting with this sort of growing cohort of people?
Yeah, I think there's things specific to our operations and delivery and couriers, and I think that are specific. There's the key pain points are often that maybe we don't have enough hours what a worker would like. Is generally one of the biggest pain points. Um, that you have somebody who actually wants to work 35 hours, but we just don't have enough orders for that person when they join. I don't think that's necessarily our fault because we depend on our customers and how big the business is and how that grows. So there's that point that they generally normally there's a lot asking for more hours. And secondly, which is in our case is less critical because we control that, but it's decent earnings per hour. With a gig economy, I think we have the responsibility to avoid, we pay per job. So a good example in our business would be if you have somebody who connects to the platform and only gets one order in an hour, well, he might earn half what a decent earnings per hour should be because we've only given him one order. So to control the offer and demand with our technology for us is super important because then we guarantee that anyone connecting will have a decent earnings per hour. And then we've got tables which compare that. We work with Wage Indicator, which detects decent earnings per region. Obviously, we're in 22 countries in 4 continents, so it's very different in every. So I think that's specific to us, but that can be applied, I think, to other sectors. And for me, it's the basics. I think what I said earlier that could be applied across all gig economy, which is simple, basic social rights, which you might be equivalent if they had a labor contract. With the main difference is the flexibility and the amount of hours that you could work. So if you worked 5 hours, you could have the benefits of those 5 hours, including holiday and etc., and not maybe a 40-hour week or 35-hour week.
And it sounds like a lot of the those protections for workers and things like that you imagine as being on the company's side as opposed to on a government side. What is that balance? What does that look like for especially startups who may not have massive amounts of funding to be able to build into their revenue streams and support structures?
Well, I would disagree with that slightly. I think it's definitely government side because they need to put in the regulation to allow this to happen, not to make it happen, to allow this to happen. I'll give you an example. We're in a number of regulations where if I started tomorrow giving more social benefits to our couriers, that would be indicative of a labor relation, and automatically I would have to move them to a labor. So we're restricted regulatory wise in many areas. And not all. So we're doing a lot of private initiatives in some of the regions where we do have the flexibility to be more open with the Horizon can actually implement. We've got in our case we've got an insurance, a global safety insurance worldwide, which covers them. So independently of some regulations have insurance if you're a freelancer already, you're covered from work, but not at every region. But we cover everyone worldwide. We've got that. And we'll be implementing other things that give coverage, additional coverage, and such as you can have time off and all these things that what I talked about earlier. But generally, I think it's regulators need to allow this to happen, and then or obligate it to happen, and we need to adapt to that. But in many places we can't because we're tighter.
Which kind of gets to a bigger tension or question, I guess, about startups in general. Startups are all about flexibility, agility, disruption. How can governments and regulations keep up with that pace of change?
I think it's difficult. They haven't done historically. Generally, technology has disrupted so many spaces and moved ahead of regulation that was often planned decades, sometimes centuries before. So I think we need to be realistic. I think what governments need to do is be more reactive and more adaptable. It's tough because you don't break all these protections that have been years or centuries put in. A good example is Europe, with the amazing social rights, which I think all workers have, which I think is fantastic. We'll not break those but I think there needs to be more adaptable, and there's countries who move faster than others. I think it's not easy, and with politics, it's not always doing the right thing. It's also about many regulations or positioning on a certain topic are guided by vote winning and not necessarily doing as part of politics that we have to adapt to. But again, And I think also I think the US, which has got a very liberal approach to things, I don't think it's an accident that they're a leader in building massive tech companies, because they built the framework that they can, companies can actually go out and launch businesses and then adapt. In Europe, there's hyper regulation generally, so it's really difficult to really start anything that's disruptive. So I think there's I think an opportunity, certainly where we come from Europe, to really, if they want to, compete technologically with Asia and the US, then there has to be the regulatory framework to allow entrepreneurs to build things and adapt them.
Yeah, the challenge there is, on the workers' rights side and the social rights piece of it, in terms of not necessarily having a lot of those protections built into legislation. Obviously, I'm an American, so I'm fairly fairly passionate about that side of things. But tell me about the European Purpose Project. What is that initiative, and what are you hoping to achieve with it?
Well, this has just started. It's an initiative. There's 4 companies, for the European leaders in gig economy and above all in on demand. And it's an initiative to really be a lot more proactive, above all with the EU, with Brussels in the process to regulate this. And it's our positioning. It's a statement of purpose, and then based on that, we'll build a code of conduct which will apply. We want to bring more companies into this project, and it's the beginning of what I began talking about a little bit earlier, which is, how can we define the framework of the minimum, guarantees and the minimum things these companies we should be adapting to and offering, and in certainly, at least in the space of the EU. We're right at the beginning, but hopefully in 2 or 3 months we'll have the code of conduct, and hopefully some more members who are asking to join, and we ought to push this. And the idea is it helps regulators who are better informed to regulate better. So be part of, be more proactive and not be more restrictive in helping the regulator and define the rules of the game.
I love that it's multiple companies in this space coming together, with to define and push common goals. How do you see that working, especially in cases where couriers may work for multiple companies? Like how are all of these gig economy companies intertwined themselves, and how do you see that developing?
Well, difficult, because around policy questions, we can be very open, and we can be aligned or not aligned, or have different positions, which are all valid or even not valid. But commercially, it's tough. We're competitors, and so we compete. We compete for customers. We compete for partners. We compete for couriers. So, but at the end of the day, many of our partners are on multiple platforms. So many of the restaurants and stores are on multiple platforms for sure. Many of the couriers are operating on different times for different. A good example with us, as we're multi-category, we're not so inclined to have all our orders at twice a day, which is lunchtime and dinner time. So we have much more horizontal orders during the day, which cover all hours. So we have a lot more hour opportunities, right? So we have many riders who work with us during the day, but might take the peak times with another operator. So we're pretty sure that there's a lot of our couriers who are on 1, 2, or even 3 platforms at a given time. And then our customers as well. And many regions they use 2 different apps. For example, if your favorite restaurant's on one app, they'll use that. But if they prefer the service and they like the brand on the other, they'll use the other one for everything else. So there's a bit of that. So we're definitely competing on all fronts, which I think is healthy. At the end of the day, the more competitive they are, benefits the three members of that. The 3 tiers. It benefits the customer, gets better service. The courier, they have better income because they can choose. And number 3, obviously, our partners, they'll sell even more.
I think that's fascinating that you can develop a full work day by kind of thinking about peak times and all of that. That's a really interesting facet of these kind of hybrid work scenarios that are coming out of all this. What do you think that platforms like Glovo, other gig economy companies, can be doing better in whatever facet, direction you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm sure we do a lot of things better, not like any. I think one thing, well, certainly from our perspective, it's really difficult as well because I don't think we had the choice. But when you're a startup, you're trying to build a company with very few people, in our case, very little funding, and then you're competing on a world stage against much bigger competitors, and you really you need to focus on things, and often reaching out to regulators, starting the conversation, explaining how your business works, we don't do until it's pretty much an issue. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong we didn't do that because we didn't have the resources. I mean, I didn't have enough software engineers, to build the product yet, so it's quite difficult when you're in a high growth and competitive. And we tried to do it as soon as possible, but I think we're a bit late. And I think I think it's important to start creating those relationships and start letting, local governments, regional governments, city councils know how you work and be part of it. And I think that we could do a lot of that earlier on, before it becomes this huge issue. No, I think in the US is a good example. I started with ride hailing in the US, but I think if they addressed the problem very early on and defined a framework, it probably wouldn't be the massive issue it is now, because there'd probably be some sort of hybrid thing that was much fairer both sides. And now it's become radical. No, it's either one or the other. You have an opinion. It's a bit like left or right.
Yeah.
And I think that things could be done earlier, but often, and certainly in our case, and pretty much most startups, you don't really have the resources or the framework to build those teams to go out and have those conversations until maybe it's a little bit too late. Yeah, so that's one of the things I think we could all do a little bit earlier, I think.
How, it does sound like it is essential to have a public policy presence early on in any kind of gig economy startup. Is that, if you had sort of one or two pieces of advice to give to startups, especially looking to scale across Europe, or other parts of the world, what would that be?
I think it depends on your business, but I think there's two things. First of all, reach out to your competitors, because you probably have the same issues, and try and find some common ground, even though you're competing. It's not always easy. Many will turn you away and say, it's not on my roadmap right now. And then I do believe in building relationships, and it doesn't necessarily need to be public policy experts at the beginning. It can be the local GM. It's just letting you know how your business works. Because when you do have an issue, 6 months down the line or a year, you've created those relationships. So when you do have an issue, they'll call you and they'll say, hey, this isn't working, instead of this company they haven't heard of or haven't reached out to them, and they're getting feedback that they're doing things that, are being criticized. So I think those are two things that are pretty easy to do, and well worth it in hindsight.